Welcome to our first podcast. This one is with Dean Evans, who's an expert on Passmore Edwards. We hope that this will be a partnership going forwards between Passmore Edwards Bicentenary and Shallal, and we want to introduce you to lots of interesting people. But the inspiration for this is John Passmore Edwards, an amazing Cornish philanthropist. And I don't really want to say much about him because Dean is the expert. So welcome, Dean. Nice to have you with us.
Hi.
And could you just tell us either a little bit about yourself or how did you first discover Passmore Edwards?
Yeah, I came down to Cornwall in 1989 and worked for the county council, and the job involved travelling around Cornwall quite a lot. And I began to see these buildings with the name Passmore Edwards above the door. And I wondered just who this chap was. And of course, at that time, the internet wasn't that well developed. So it was a few years later that I found a little book about Passmore Edwards. And the more I read, the more I got interested in. And I found out that he'd built 70 or funded 70 public buildings, 20 in Cornwall, and found out a little bit about his background and the way he worked and why, in fact, he did fund these buildings: libraries, hospitals, schools, convalescent homes, orphanages. He wanted to help people help themselves. And he said, if I can fund the ladder, the poor would climb. And that was behind it. He gave them the premises and he allowed them to make use of them.
Fantastic, isn't he? And I hadn't even heard of him. I think I came across him on the internet at some point, and then it just opened a whole world, because like you say, all around Cornwall, it's Passmore Edwards on all our wonderful buildings. And so what do you most like? What draws you to him? I mean, he's an extraordinary philanthropist and homegrown, wasn't he? But
I think that was the point that he was. He was born in Blackwater, which is a small village near Truro. And he was an ordinary chap. His father was a carpenter. He'd received very little education, but he had this ambition to be useful. And I think that we follow through his life that he went up to London, he went to Manchester and then to London. He tried his hand at publishing, went bankrupt, ended up in debtor's prison, but made, come back from that and became a relatively wealthy man. And then he applied this money to the things that he thought were important in life, helping other people.
so I was just wanting to ask a little bit more in detail, Dean, about how Passmore Edwards earned his money, and then maybe how he managed the giving away of it as well.
Yes, well, he was probably the most successful newspaper man of his time. He owned several newspapers and a publishing business as well. And he said that it was the working man, through buying his newspapers or printing them, that had earned his wealth. And so he wanted to give that money back to help them have a better quality of life. So he said he saved up a few shillings until he had £1, and then when he had a few pounds, he would give it away. So it was, a steady progress over quite a short period of his life. He was getting on a bit. He was in his 70s when he started to give his money, and perhaps a period of 14 years, he gave most of his money away. I think it was 90% of his personal wealth.
Brilliant, isn't it? And didn't he and his father, they used to teach literacy in the village, didn't they, when he was younger? Is that right?
A school friend, John Simmons, they started a small school. He himself had gone to the Dame school at twopence a week, but there was obviously people in the village that couldn't afford twopence a week. And so he started this little school at the Bible Christian Chapel, and he taught them to read and write on an evening or Sunday morning. And that school was quite successful, actually. And he said amongst his most treasured possessions were a few letters that he received from men and boys that learned to read and write at that little school.
Oh, that's fantastic, isn't it? That's lovely. And I could almost ask you all of his life story, but that might be for another day, because he went all the way up to Manchester, didn't he, on a boat in the cold, and he he handed out pamphlets against the Corn Law and all sorts of things. So he came from a real place of quite a lot of hardship, didn't he, into his wealth. It wasn't in an easy or a privileged way.
No.
Yeah, impressive, really wonderful man. And he supported lots of other projects as well, didn't he? Because I love that, because there's the literacy in the libraries and the convalescent homes and the water fountains. And I love the fact that he wanted to make a lighthouse, but no one would really take it on. But there wasn't he also, like, he supported the suffragettes and he was anti-slavery. It wasn't just one thing. It was a whole sort of way of thinking, wasn't it, around society?
It was. The late 19th century was such a period of social and political reform, and he seemed to be involved in it, in most of it. He was member of so many societies, and he didn't just pay his guinea membership fee. He was there as treasurer or fundraiser, or he was president, and whatever it is you read about, you'll find that he's at the back of it somewhere, whether it was slavery, Stop the War campaign, promoting libraries, promoting hospitals, promoting social housing. He was there doing his bit.
Fantastic. And so we've had a crisis of our libraries, haven't we? And not all of them have survived, but there are still quite a lot of buildings, aren't there, out there being used. And one of the ones we want to visit at some point in this podcast is Redruth Library, which is going to be reused and called the Ladder, which is exciting when that initial impulse is still there. So I think, thank you, that's the most wonderful introduction to him, which is what we really need. And then I want to ask everybody this same sort of question, which is, what would you do now if you were like Passmore Edwards and towards the end of your life you had enough money? I would say nowadays maybe £1 billion, because, you know, we need a reasonable amount to spend. How would you spend it? What do you think would be the most useful thing to do with that in our society as we are now?
Well, you know, it is the Euro lottery fund at the moment. You read quite often people have won £100 million, £150 million. So it is, if you play the lottery, it is feasible that you might have £100 million to give away. And after you've helped your family, then there is still going to be an awful lot that you could actually share. And I'm sure most of us have spent the odd 5 minutes or so thinking, what would we do if we won that lottery prize? Would it be fancy cars, or whether we would try and do some good? And I think the remarkable thing about Edwards is that all those issues that he campaigned over back in the 19th century, health, education, housing, they're still with us, even slavery. And so that there are so many good causes that you can give your money to. Personally, I don't know whether, you know, a fair bit of it perhaps would go towards making sure his buildings remained in use for the community, because one or two of them are under threat. They're old buildings, they need maintenance. Local authorities haven't got that funding, and quite often they want to sell them off. So some of that money would go towards maintaining his heritage, and perhaps following the same lines through education and health.
Yes. Oh, super. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Dean. Is there anything else you want to tell us about that you think? I mean, it's so wonderful, isn't it? You can look him up on the internet. He's got his book, A Few Footprints, is still available. I saw it on Amazon and different sites the other day. So that's been republished. And your book is Funding the Ladder.
Yeah, Funding
the copy you can wave at us.
Just so happens.
It just so happens. Excellent, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, you can buy that. And you have a website, don't you, which is very good.
The Passmore Edwards Legacy website, and all the facts and figures that I've found out over the years. Still a work in progress, because people send me photographs on a regular basis. Fantastic. And of course, next year being the bicentenary, we're hard at work now creating events to celebrate that.
Yes, along with Cornish tea treats, we hope, don't we? So that'll be great fun.
Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah.
Thank you. Lovely. Thank you very much.
So if we've got the glasses right, we might have a taste.